Welcome to Mind the Chatter, a podcast where we break down mental health one conversation at a time. I'm Lilian, and as always, my co-host is Peter.
Hello.
We're both licensed counselors, registered with the Counselors and Psychologist Board of Kenya. And today, we're starting something new, a series.
Yeah, so this will be our first mini-series, and we'll be talking about loss and grief. And this is an experience that touches all of us at some point, often in ways we don't expect.
When prepping for this episode, we came across a podcast dedicated to loss and grief.
And the weird thing is they were talking about some pretty obvious ones and some obscure ones. So there was like loss of a parent, loss of hair, loss of fertility, loss of identity, loss of your role in a family, loss of multiple pregnancies, loss of childhood.
And so many more.
Yeah, and there were just so many losses, and the idea here is simple but very profound. Loss isn't limited to death, and grief isn't reserved for funerals. So in this episode, we will expand your definition of loss and what grief really means.
Let's jump right into defining terms. Loss is any situation where something or someone important to you is no longer present. And it could be a loved one, a job, a relationship. It could be your health. It could even be your version of what you imagined your life would become.
And grief is your response to that loss, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and even socially. It's the process your body and mind go through as you try to make sense of the changes. And something we should probably consider is that grief is very sneaky. It doesn't always show up, in a straight line or on schedule.
Oh, the schedule one made me think it's not like you can go, I'm gonna cry in the evening after I've gone to work. Never works like that. It just hits you anywhere.
And the way it shows up is totally different from person to person. So there's no standard version of grief. Everyone can have their own path. You can be suffering the same loss with a member of your family or even your spouse, but the way you guys grieve will be markedly different.
Yeah, so one of the things that help is knowing the many ways in which grief can show up. It's not just tears or sadness. It can impact your emotions, your body, your thoughts, and even your behavior.
And our goal here is to help you recognize these wide range of responses so you don't feel like you're going crazy. You're not. You're probably just grieving.
We're going to do a quick run through of the emotional, cognitive, behavior, and any other changes you might expect during grief. A good place to start is emotional, because this is where we focus a lot on.
Yeah, and most people, when you think of grief, you're probably just thinking of the emotional reaction. So this could be sadness, anger, anxiety, loneliness, and sometimes even numbness, whereby you don't feel anything at all because your system is being overloaded.
And then thoughts-wise, things like disbelief, you can't quite believe that this is happening. There's confusion.
And I think when it comes to confusion, this is whereby somebody who's experiencing a loss, they'll be sort of out of their element and you're
True.
talking to them and things are not quite making sense.
Yeah, or they're doing something they have done every day of their lives, but for some reason they get it wrong. They were going to take kids to school, they go past the school.
Yeah, and I think that even comes into the whole preoccupation whereby
You're doing one thing, but your thoughts are on something entirely different.
yeah, so you kind of look lost and, somebody looking at you, are you 100% there? No, you're not.
And then this one might sound a little woo, but there's also a sense of presence. You can feel the person near you or around you, or you even turn and your phone got stolen and you're turning to pick it from where you usually put it.
Yeah, so there's that whole sense of something is there, but it's not.
Not quite there. And then finally, there are hallucinations.
And this is you're hearing voices, and it's more common than you would imagine, especially after you've suffered a loss through death.
True.
So somebody will tell you, I was walking around and, okay, let's break it down a little. Hallucinations can be auditory, there could be visual hallucination, and sometimes you even smell things that aren't there. So you can think if somebody used to wear this sort of scent and you're walking around somewhere and you can sense it. And when it comes to visual hallucination,
You're walking in a crowd and then for a second it seems like you've seen the person.
yeah, and sometimes you even think, am I going crazy because I keep sensing this person or seeing this person who is not supposed to be there?
Yep. And then their behavior changes. These are things like sleep disturbances, appetite changes. Either you lose your appetite or it becomes like really enhanced, social withdrawal, or you get this avoidance. You don't want to go to places where this situation was as real to you, or you start visiting the place more often.
And then there's also treasuring belongings. Or on the other side, you could like quickly throw away everything which belongs to the person you've lost. And this could be relationship wise or you've lost them through death.
You've said relationship wise. I remember I had a friend who the relationship ended and they folded up all the things they had gotten in this relationship and then put them in a box, put them away, but wasn't quite ready to throw them out. Yeah.
And see, that's one approach. The other approach is whereby people start a bonfire with stuff from their
A
exes.
purge.
I'm sure you can think of some song whereby people are, either tearing stuff belonging to somebody they used to love.
Yep, I can see it.
And when it comes to cognitions, grief can mimic depression, but they're not the same.
Freud, the father of psychology, said that in grief, the world looks poor and empty. And in depression, the person feels poor and empty.
Yeah, and I think we need to emphasize on that. When you're grieving, the world just seems empty. There's no sweetness to it. There's no sunshine, which is why when you're grieving, you walk around and you're looking at other people and you're wondering, how can you guys be going on with life as usual when, I'm going through
Yeah.
this loss?
I remember for me, there's a time I was thinking the world should just stop for a minute so that I can catch up with everyone else doing what they're doing.
Okay, we're going to do a little bit of self-disclosure here. So what was going on for you?
Oh, this was after I lost my mom, so it was pretty intense. I could not understand how everyone was moving on with life, going to work, visiting, as if everything was okay.
Yeah, so in grief, you kinda can't understand how everybody is just going through life. Like, this big thing hasn't just happened to them. And that's kind of the point. It hasn't happened to them, it has happened to you.
Yeah. So, why does grief hurt so much? And I think this is a question that is usually on a lot of people's minds.
And right now that we've mentioned it, probably it's on a loop in your head and you can't rest until you have the answer.
You're saying it's going to become one of those 3 a.m. thoughts.
And we're going to leave you with that so that you think about it.
No, we are not that mean. We are going to define why grief grief hurts so much.
Yeah, so psychologically speaking, we operate on mental frameworks called schemas. And this is how we understand our world, relationships, and roles.
So when you lose something, this schema has to change. For example, if you saw yourself as a parent, partner, a professional, that identity is taken away by something. And it's like pulling a thread from a sweater and then slowly the sweater just unravels.
Grief is your mind trying to rebuild meaning, to rewrite your internal story with the missing piece.
And the pain isn't just emotional, it's biological. Brain imaging studies show that grief activates the same regions as physical pain. And I'm going to say a bunch of heavy words, so listen. Like the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. That's why the loss can feel like an ache in your chest or a punch in the gut.
I'm wondering if you can point that out if I give you the image of a brain.
If I can point out the insula.
Uh-huh.
I'd have to use ChatGPT, but sure.
Yeah, hard words.
So basically, your brain processes emotional separation almost the same way it does a physical injury.
Yeah, so it kind of can't tell the difference between this is an emotional pain and this is a physical pain, which is why a heartache literally feels like your heart is breaking, physically.
I know, and technically, we know the heart just pumps blood.
Yeah. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Humans are wired for connection because historically, Isolation meant danger. I think we covered this in a previous episode,
Yeah,
whereby
we
if
did.
you were left by your tribe,
Then you wouldn't survive.
yeah, you'd probably die.
Ooh, that rhymed.
So when we lose someone deeply important or something that we cherished, the brain interprets it as a threat to survival. And that intense emotional pain is the brain's way of saying something essential is gone. Pay attention.
The emotional response you show, sadness, works as a social signal. And things like crying, having a sad facial expression, going quiet, this tells others that I need support. And most times it draws people towards you. And that's by design.
And of course, sometimes people respond awkwardly. You can be crying in public and people will, just, I'm ignoring that. I am not seeing that. I'll keep walking. So,
I know, and it's so weird. Anyway.
so regardless of these few moments when people don't respond as they should, the impulse to show emotion still matters. It's not a weakness. It's your nervous system doing its job, calling in for reinforcements, if you will.
And you do get some really good people who come through for you in a way that gives comfort.
Let's talk about the grief process. Now, there's no universal grief timeline, but this is what often is part of the ride. You'll have sadness, numbness, anger, longing, confusion, and sometimes even relief at the loss.
And relief is kind of a weird one
Yeah.
because you lose a job and you're feeling, finally, some time to myself. And at the back of your mind, there's the aspect of I'm not going to get money, but still the relief is there.
Yeah. Or somebody dies and you're feeling relieved because probably they were keeping you from, say you're married and you don't believe in divorce and then they die and then you're like, till death do us part.
And never speak of it.
Yeah.
And then another thing that happens is grief sometimes comes sharp and quick. And then at times it's just like a background function or noise.
And both of them are valid.
Oh, yeah. So people grieve differently, and there are different reasons for this. One, there's the strength of the connection you had with the person.
And this is depending on how close somebody is to you, you'll feel their death more or less.
True.
So you can have this uncle in the family. So if you see him every other Christmas and don't really ever talk to him, and then you get a phone call, hi, Uncle Bob is dead. Probably will be, oh, part of my family tree has been pruned, but that's about it. On the other hand, if this is an uncle you talk to every other week, probably spent part of your childhood with him and he's a really important figure to you, then if
Yeah.
you get the same call, hi, Uncle Bob has died, your world stops.
True. And I'm thinking sometimes it's not even how much you've interacted, it could be impact. That one teacher who changed your life and you hear that they're dead will affect you more than the principal who would run after you in high school.
That's a very, very specific example.
Ours didn't run, she was old.
Ageist.
How is that ageist? Anyway, another thing is how much reliance you placed on the person or the thing that you've lost. And I'd like to define this kidogo. For example, if being a manager at work was the basis of your entire identity, if you lost that job, it would hit you worse than someone who has multiple things that define them.
Yeah, so if you wear multiple hats, losing one won't be as bad as if your whole identity is around this one thing. So when it's taken away from you, you're like, who am I?
Another thing is personality. People who are melancholics would probably respond to grief more intensely than sanguines.
Yeah, so if you're a penguin, odds are you're already just happy, go lucky. So when you get sad, and not just being happy, you probably also have a bigger social circle around you. So when you're sad, you will reach out to people and you'll get that social support, and you're more inclined to be happy to see the lighter side of things. So odds are you'll recover.
And you talk about it more.
So odds are you'll recover sooner than somebody who's just, closed up and they really think deeply about things and the meaning of life.
Yeah. And then finally, there's coping skills and support systems. And in coping skills, it makes me think of even self efficacy. If you're the kind of person who believes that I'll get through this, I'll manage to get to a better place than I am right now, chances are you're going to go through grief in a very different way from someone who doesn't believe they can get over it.
Yeah, and you can think of this as, say you've lost your wife and you're the kind of person who depending on her for everything, dressing you when you go out somewhere, she's the one who's going to kind of introduce you. So if you're dependent on her to that extent, her death is not just, it's not just the emotional bit of it, there's also the practical. And that's why most guys, you lose your wife and suddenly you lose a whole bunch of kgs and you look like, some malnourished person.
Yeah, or you burn all those furias in the house boiling water. And grief is weird because it's painful, it's exhausting, and it doesn't come with a neat checklist.
Having said that, psychologists have tried to come up with some models or even frameworks for helping people understand grief better. And most of you have probably heard of the 5 stages of grief, and that would be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And that's the Kubler-Ross model. It's gotten into pop culture and therapy rooms and maybe even your own way of thinking about loss.
Yeah, it is on TikTok and Instagram a lot.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, those 5 stages weren't originally meant to describe how we grieve losses. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with them in 1969 to describe how terminally ill patients process their own impending death. Over time, this was applied to bereavement, but they're not universal or linear. You don't unlock them like video game levels.
Yeah, right. You might skip stages, loop back, or feel everything is okay all at once, and that's okay. There are other ways of understanding grief too. So, like these Parker's phases of mourning, and with this one, there's numbness, yearning, disorganization, and reorganization.
When you look at every one of these models, they have a little different aspect of all the things that we've mentioned that go into grief, the sadness, the anxiety, the longing. It's all just given a different definition or a different word for it.
Yeah, so different flavor, but kinda at the heart of it, it's,
The same things.
yeah.
And a statement we keep hearing in regards to loss is time heals all wounds. But a grief expert called Dr. William Warden says healing does not come just from time passing, but from what we do with the time.
And one of our favorite models is the dual process model of grief. And this says that we grieve in 2 ways. There's the loss oriented and restoration oriented.
So, something we need to note is that these two processes work at the same time. And in the loss oriented is what you expect, feeling the pain, crying, remembering, sitting with the sadness. Then in the restoration oriented, you are adapting. You're learning how to cook food for one person. You are filing papers. You're laughing at weird cat videos to distract yourself. And it's not an avoidance. It's just survival.
And the idea here is that we oscillate between the two. So one day you're sobbing over old photos, and the next day you're reorganizing your closet. So back and forth, back and forth. And that's how you get to heal.
Yep.
And this model doesn't just apply to death, it fits any major loss, whether it's a breakup, job loss, and even grieving over chronic illness. You mourn what was while trying to figure out what now.
So, if you're grieving, know this. It's not about getting over it. It's about building something new while carrying what was. You're allowed to cry and laugh, to hurt and grow. And we are gonna be right here while you unpack it all.
So, we can talk about the role of therapy in grief. I'll begin by saying that therapy isn't the first thing you think of when you suffer a loss. I mean, sometimes it's not even necessary. There are
Yeah.
different schools of thought when it comes to this. There are therapists who think that, if you suffer a loss, you should go for therapy. I happen to be in the school of thought that doesn't think that therapy is necessary or even advisable for everybody who's suffered a loss.
Yeah, allow some time for readjustment. I've had a lot of either a therapist is being called in to break the news to people, and that makes sense because when you're breaking the news, there are different reactions. But after that has happened, then give some time for the person to go through the aspect of loss and come in when it takes a little too long or it's not moving in the way that it should. So, actually, in the DSM, which is basically the mental health Bible, previous version had a distinguishing aspect between grief and depression. If you came to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist and you had suffered a loss, they'd take some time before they diagnosed you with depression.
So having symptoms of depression while you're going through grief it's part of the process. So therapy helps when grief is complicated, prolonged, or interfering with daily life.
Yep.
Therapy can also help normalize your grief. So many clients ask, is this normal? And often the answer is yes. So therapy can help to normalize some of the feelings you're having or even thoughts and behavior.
Therapy can also help you if you're grieving a loss that isn't socially recognized. And these are things like a miscarriage, a job loss, the loss of an identity. And these, we call them defranchised losses because you can rarely have a funeral for a job that you had.
I was going to laugh, but I won't.
There's nothing funny about losing a job.
Well, it's kind of funny if you're picturing a small funeral procession and a teeny weeny casket carrying your old job title and your now deactivated office access card tucked inside. Yeah, so let's talk about some tips for grieving well. And the first one is just, let yourself feel whatever is coming.
Yeah. The other one is talking about it. Talk to a friend, a therapist, write in your journal, just get it out.
And the next one is move your body. I felt like a fraud saying that because I'm not very good at moving my body, but there you go. Could be like gentle walks. It doesn't have to be dancing, but dancing totally would help.
Yeah. Then give yourself time. Don't rush. There's no finish line in grieving. And something that a lot of people tend to do is numbing a loss. So avoid numbing too much. We've mentioned the aspect of oscillating between loss and restoration, but make sure that you're not doing a lot of the distraction. And finally, rituals help. This could be something like lighting a candle at church for the person who's died, or writing a letter to them, planting a tree, just giving yourself something that reminds you of what you've lost.
And remember that just because you're smiling, it doesn't mean you're over it. Healing and grieving can coexist.
Yep. So today we've introduced loss and grief. And like we said when we started, it's going to be a series.
Over the next 3 episodes, we'll dive deeper into specific types of loss. So we'll begin with loss of a loved one through death, and then go to loss of a romantic relationship, and finally wrap it up with loss of status or identity.
Another one of those you can't hold a funeral for. Grief touches on everything, and the more we talk about it, the less isolated we'll feel.
So if today's episode brought you comfort, clarity, or just a moment of, oh, it's not just me, share it with someone else walking their own grief journey. Or don't. Grief moves at its own pace.
If you have feedback, a topic you'd like us to cover, or you just want to say hi, you can reach us on mindthechatterpod@gmail.com. The contact info is in the show notes too.
And if you'd like to book a session with either of us, you can reach us through the same email.
That's it for today. Toodles!
Catch you on the next one.